Welcome to Roundtable Mindset, the podcast where we seek to understand and share different perspectives in order to grow and challenge our own. And we encourage you, our guest, to do the same.
Each week, we will pick a topic to discuss, sharing our own unique thoughts and insights. There will be times when we won't agree, and let's be real, that's probably going to be most of the time, and that's okay. We feel it's important to understand that we can live in this polarized world and still respect one another and even be friends.
Well, hello and welcome back to Roundtable Mindset. This is Jamie.
And I'm Malin.
And we're back with another exciting episode of Roundtable Mindset, here for your listening pleasure.
And we survived. We survived the colds and the brutal winter.
Right. Well, except we still have some time.
Well, again, the countdown to spring is still going, but can we at least acknowledge the fact that we made it through? I think it was, negative 47 degrees below zero at one point. That's way too cold.
I'm sorry. It's death outside is what it was. It was death outside. It was terrible. But yeah, we survived.
I don't like living in an environment where it's trying to kill me, right? Like, I don't want me to be in a battle with the elements for my survival.
Part of me just wants to say I don't want to hear it because every time I come visit you, I feel like the environment is trying to kill me.
Listen to you every time. Oh, those 2 times you've come.
Yes.
Why don't you wait to have some more data so you can do your analysis, Jamie?
Super enticing. Please come back and visit us again in the muggy, hot, humid, you can't breathe because you're drinking your air atmosphere.
Imagine the last time you were here when it was that hot, and now go to negative 47 degrees below zero with wind chill.
Well, we're just about there with you, so that's... I don't know. It just gets hotter. I don't think it's hotter there. I think it's the humidity. I do feel like your humidity is way worse than ours. But
it is. It is. We have crazy, disgusting, stupid humidity. So, yeah. But as of right now, I will take that over the cold. Okay. I'm not going to promise I'm going to stop whining about the weather because once I hit spring, everything's fine for me. But until then, I may bring it up again, especially if it gets 47 below zero.
It makes me laugh how much you hate winter.
We
grew up in the same place and I'm like, it's whatever. And you're just like,
well, it's the older I get. I swear every year I hate it more and more. And I sound like an old man because I'm like, I walk by windows and I can feel the cold from the window. I'm like, it's in my bones. And my family just looks at me and they're like, you are not an 80-year-old man. Shut up. But I can feel the cold. Like every year it gets worse and worse for me. So.
Let me validate that for you. I validate that for you because I agree. I came from Minnesota. That's where I was born. That's where my family's from. And I used to be able to run around with a sweatshirt and shorts on in 20-degree weather and not even bat an eyelash. But the older I get, I now own a coat. I didn't do that for a long time. If I wasn't forced to, once I was an adult and could make that choice, I just ran around in a hoodie, right? Not anymore. Nope. I've got a coat. I've got gloves, and I bought myself a stocking cap this year, so I might be on the same path as you, maybe just a little farther behind.
Yeah. Well, and every year I just envision myself being a snowbird where maybe I'll spend the winter in Arizona and then come back, around April timeframe and then leave again just to go down south. Like I swear it's on I don't do vision boards, but I'm about to put on a vision board. I'm just telling you, like, I want to make sure that happens because I need it to happen. So
there's only one thing on Malin's vision board. That's a house in Arizona.
It just has the word Arizona and arrows pointing to it all around. That's the only thing.
Oh, that's awesome.
What else is going on with you, Jamie? Anything new from the last time we talked?
No, not really. It's been, just kind of that getting back to routine, getting acclimated to, the pace after. It's funny, a week or two off, 12 days, I think is what I had. And it's taken me a bit of time to get back in the groove. So it's, I now feel like I'm just kind of back in that routine. And so things are settling in nicely. I don't know.
Yeah, it's amazing when you take that time off, at the end of the year, and we've talked about it, so I'm not going to go into a bunch of detail, but we take that time off, but then there's like this ripple effect that extends weeks after. And it's even hitting me, right? We're finally getting into our rhythms, and we do things called sprints. And so the sprints are 2 weeks worth of work that we do in IT. And I came back from my break in the middle of one of these sprints. So I was kind of in limbo, and the team wasn't engaging with me. And then the new sprint started, and now it's like a rhythm of a team that got thrown off, that we're starting to try to resynchronize again. And until we get back into that synchronicity, if that's the word, it just feels a little bit clunky at times and not really as smooth as it used to be. But it'll happen again.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love this space, actually. It's cool because I can go back and look year after year about this time of the year and getting back into, it's like you have a nice break, you get a refresh and recharge, and then you get to go back to, setting up those routines. And I feel like there's a little more intention after the first of the year. Like you kind of have a new direction, or you focus on some different things. And so I feel like I'm feeling very successful right now, very productive, and, things like that. So I love this time of year.
Yeah, that's really good that a hippie as yourself could feel successful.
Well, yeah.
All your intentions.
Hippies are successful too.
I'm just trying to be funny. We can edit that out. Okay, so I have a food for thought for you.
Okay.
We've never discussed anything like this yet, so I'm kind of excited. But, Jamie, what do you think is your most justified paranoia?
My most justified paranoia is... I have so many unjustified paranoias. Like I have so many irrational fears of stupid things that will never happen. For instance, have I ever told you about the lawnmower thing?
I need a little bit more, but nothing jumps out.
Scared to death for whatever reason. From the time I was a young child, I imagined that the lawnmower blade would fall off the lawnmower and come flying at me and cut me off at the ankles. So forever, I was afraid of using the lawnmower because I was certain it was going to fall apart, fly apart. And it didn't matter how many times my dad told me, Jamie, that those things rotate in a way that would just, keep it from falling off. Didn't matter. So I have lots of irrational fears like that. I think the most justified one is, which still is kind of comical to me. Sorry. I used to live out of town, and I used to have to drive 30 miles every day to get to work, right? And when we first moved out there, it was my ex and I, and we didn't have any kids, and so we were driving in together to save gas. And we, on at least, was it two occasions, hit a deer, and I can't tell you how many countless ground squirrels I took out in the commute. Once it was a family of raccoons. All of these things bruised my heart so bad. But I have this fear that I'm going to hit a deer on the highway, and it's going to flip over my hood, kick its feet through my window, and then kick me to death. But that's kind of a justified fear because I've hit deer and they've done some serious damage.
Well, and I was going to say, I think it's justified because I think something like that or versions of that have happened before, right? Where people have hit a deer, or maybe a deer has ran into them and it's jumped over the hood and caved in the windshield. I think there's cases of that actually happening. Now, kicking you to death, I don't know about that, but it still can really hurt you or make you drive off the road and you could possibly die from the accident. So I think that's justified.
Well, I just imagine them trying to get out of my car by running and kicking me to death. So you're paranoid on driving on highways at night? Yeah, mostly. Yeah. I used to put these little deer whistles on my car. I don't know if they actually helped, but it did make me feel more confident in driving at night. The whole placebo effect thing totally worked.
Jamie's I don't care if they work or not, but they are helping me, so I have them all over my car.
Literally. It was the whole thing. Okay, so what about you?
Yeah, so for me, again, this goes back to my daughter works at a local retail place. And her boss, she wrote something in the snow, a person's car, or a coworker's name in the snow. And they were talking about it, and the coworker went to my daughter and was like, "Oh, was that you that wrote my name?" And she's like, "Yeah." And they were kind of laughing about it. And the manager came around and said, "You really shouldn't do that, because that's what sex traffickers do to distract you so then they can grab you." And I started thinking, I'm like, okay, to be total aware of your surroundings, I 100% support. And there may be techniques out there that I'm not aware of. So I am smart enough to know that I don't know every technique sex traffickers use. But for a split moment, I was like, man, that paranoia runs deep. And that's kind of where this whole question came from. So then I had to look at myself, and I'm like, well, do I have any paranoias? And I do. And the one that is the most justified, or the one that I'm like, this could actually happen. Here it is for me, Jamie.
Okay.
If I am driving home, and it doesn't matter if it's by myself, a group of people, my family, whoever, and I'm driving, if there is a car that's behind me, I will not stop at home. I will not go and open up my garage door and put my car into the garage.
Seriously?
Because I feel like if that somebody behind me is following me and I haven't paid attention, I don't want them to know where I live. So I will drive past my home, and I will keep driving until the person behind me veers off or parks into their house. And then I will circle back around and come home and then go into the garage.
I do that too.
See? It's justified.
Only if they've it's not every single person. If somebody's behind me and I recognize the car as a neighbor or something like that. But if they've followed me for a long period of time, yeah, I won't stop at my house either.
Well, if I've noticed, again, if it's a neighbor's car and I can see them pulling out of their driveway and then they get behind me, no, I'm not going to do that. But most times it's just a pair of lights, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or during the day, it's a car that is like, I don't recognize that car. But yeah, every single time I will not go home. And I've noticed that we started instilling that into our children. My daughter and my son both drive, and we've been telling them the same thing. If somebody's behind you, don't come home. Keep driving. Drive someplace public. Drive someplace. Drive to the police station. Whatever. If you don't feel comfortable. And part of me, I think that's good advice. And then there's part of me that's like, but there's safety at home, right? Come home because there's safety. But then I'm like, I don't know. And you said it earlier, irrational fear, right? So I kind of took some notes when I was asking this question. And how many paranoias do you think people have that are either rooted in irrational fear or irrational thinking? Things that just don't make sense, but except to that person. And now they've created this whole paranoia around it, and they've altered their behavior because of it. Because that's what I've done. That's what I'm doing with my kids.
I don't know that it's always irrational, because I feel like, for instance, I don't know that I would have thought about the deer on the road had I not lived out of town and had to drive in on the highway every day, right? I hit a couple deer, so then it became justified. It became part of my experience, and then I just took it 3 steps further, because that is my specialty, is taking it to the umpteenth degree, right? But I feel like most of the time those things come out of experience, that they come out of, not necessarily, although I don't know, have you ever been victimized at your home 3 days after you were followed by a car because they learned where you lived and wanted to come back and get just you specifically? Does that come out of experience? I don't know.
Well, and it's me trying to avoid a situation that could happen, right? So I'm trying to prevent that event from taking place. So to me, being a little bit paranoid is helping in that regard, because if I'm not as paranoid with that specific issue, I could be leading someone directly to my house. They could see how I open up the garage door. They could be paying attention. That is something, that's why I do it, is because I want to keep safe. And I also want to not let people who are following me, because if they're interested in who I am enough to follow me and try to see where I live or where I'm going, I don't want them to know where I live. I was going to say, because if they don't know where I live, then they can't come back and victimize me.
Right. Well, here's another one for you. Not something I've ever thought of. In my town, it is super popular to put stickers on your car that have your kid's name and the activities that they're part of, right? So I had a cheerleader and I had a wrestler, and I was super excited to be part of the club, right? Like I was excited to have the emblem on the back of my car with my kid's name and all the things, right? So, so I ordered them, and I didn't like the one that they had for cheer. So I had a friend of mine make one, and he was coming over to install it. And I had a friend over, and she was like, "Why are you putting your kids' names on your car?" And I was like, well, because it's the thing to do. That's like I have arrived, right? Like I have a high school kid that's in an activity. I am part of the club. And she was like, that's how sex traffickers target your kids. And I was like instantly like, oh my God, I'm part of the club who's now trying to traffic my children. It was I don't know, kind of ridiculous. No identifying, but I'll be super honest. I think that might have been when the like people following me heightened in paranoia. Like, are they trying to get my kids' names? Like,
right. Well, and I think we probably should move on to our main topic. But if anybody's listening, if you have a paranoia that you practice, I guess that's the right word, or you have in your life, please let us know. I'd love to hear more of them. You can come onto our social medias or send us an email and let us know. And that's at roundtablemindset@gmail.com. So hope to hear from you, because I think this is really interesting. When I was first thinking about it, I was like, yeah, I'm not a very paranoid person. And then I started thinking about the things that I do and my actions. And I'm like, that's driven by paranoia. That could be driven by paranoia. So it's like, maybe I am. And I just never realized it before.
Maybe. Paranoid personality. Malin, I didn't know that about you.
I didn't know about myself. So it's not surprising you didn't know about it.
Well, a couple weeks ago, we released an episode 39 of our podcast was about emotional intelligence. And we did like an emotional intelligence quiz, and that was a lot of fun. And we talked a little bit about wanting to delve into the dark side of EQ, right? So I understand you've done some deep dive research into the dark side of emotional EQ. So what do you have for us today, Malin?
Yeah, so this was really, really interesting, because some of the things I kind of knew about and some of the things that I didn't. And so, and part of doing my research, I'm gonna tell you some things that I at first struggled with and I resisted. As usual, when I hear something new, the first thing I go to is I got to disprove it because it can't be true, right? That's my personality. That's how I begin to break things down. I've stopped fighting it. I've just kind of embraced it. Like, I will challenge anything and then come back around. If I'm wrong, I have no problems apologizing. If I'm right, I have no problems saying I told you so. So that's how all this begins.
That's true, folks. If none of you know him personally, that is exactly how it is. So
sometimes it makes for awkward conversations afterwards. But anyways, I digress. So I started, our episode earlier, I was like, okay, I think that was one of the questions I asked. I was like, I want to look to see what the dark side of emotional intelligence, because there's so much that you can do with it in emotional intelligence. So again, if you haven't listened to episode 39, please, stop now, go back and listen to it. It was a fun episode. Take the quiz, understand kind of where this bubbled up from, get the bases down of our conversations, and then come back here and resume this episode. I think you'll be able to follow along a lot better and have that base understanding that we established in the last episode. So I'll go ahead and say that. So yes, there is a dark side to emotional intelligence. And I got to be honest, in all my research, Jamie, there's evidence after evidence that people who can hone their emotional skills through their emotional intelligence, they're better at manipulating other people. And so you can start reading your own emotions better, which means you can control your own emotions better. So you can start increasing your deception. Because, have you ever heard it's like written all over your face before? Yeah, I was king of that, right? Like, I'm like, oh, I have a good poker face. Until you like go look in a mirror and try to think of some of those conversations. I had tells all over the place. And my wife could tell them. They all laughed at me because I'm like, I have a good poker face. They're like, you really don't. The more you hone your emotional intelligence, the more you can keep your own emotions in check. And then you can also stop having those tells. But you can also start recognizing other people's emotional state, which can extend into how you can start manipulating them. And that's really the dark side. That's the beginning part of the dark side of emotional intelligence, which I thought was, it's kind of what I thought it was. You know, I've always like, hey, if you can learn how to read people's nonverbals and you can pick up on subtle cues, surely you could use those to your advantage and potentially manipulate the situation and people into doing what you want them to do. I just think it's an incredible weapon, right? It's like an incredible tool. In the positive space, it's an incredible tool. In the negative space, what an equally amazing and incredible weapon you could use. So just to kind of start seeing the contrast.
Yeah, I think I struggle. I guess I'm struggling with that because I'm like, oh, but those have all been really good things for me. Like, I remember...
Manipulation?
No. I mean, well, no. I remember being in a meeting once, and I don't remember the players or what was happening or any of that, but I remember something was said during the meeting that really frustrated me, and I was like, keeping it cool as a cucumber. You know, I didn't burst out and scream or anything like that. But afterwards, one of the other professionals pulled me aside and they were like, "You really need to work on your poker face, don't you, Jamie?" And I was like, "Oh, crap." Because I thought I was doing a really good job at keeping it together. So I've really worked hard on that, you know, just to not even to manipulate the situation, but to give myself space to process, I guess. So I don't know, thinking about it as a tool for manipulation. I'm trying hard not to feel called out.
Well, I tried to separate them in my mind. If you're using emotional intelligence for the positive, I think that's where it's a tool. If you're using it for the negative, that's where I've coined it as it's a weapon, because you are using it against people and doing it for self-serving goals, things that you want to achieve. So to me, that's the distinction. Tool versus weapon. So in the negative space, let's look at the EQ as a weapon that we're using against people.
Okay.
And there's a piece of this that when we get to it, I hope it hits you as hard as it hits me, because I'm sitting here, I'm thinking, yeah, this is plain as day for me. And I know you and I've had conversation, and this is not a place you would have taken this, I don't think. Speak for yourself though. But in our conversations, I never got the vibe from you that think of all this wonderful tooling you can do for the positive, but then you just don't naturally gravitate to how can I use this in a negative space, or how can this be used in a negative space. Right. I don't know if you would agree with that or not, but that was my interpretation of our conversations.
Yeah, no, every time I learn about emotional intelligence, it tools. Yeah, I do call them tools. That's exactly the word I use. I wouldn't have thought of it as weaponized though. So
we are weaponizing those tools, Jamie, and now we're going to be using them for the dark side.
Weapons of mass destruction or something. Yeah, okay.
Well, and again, I know this will hit you where it counts. We're talking about people on the emotional spectrum. So this isn't, emotional scarring is a lot deeper than physical scars, right? You can do a lot of psyche damage through emotions and messing with people's minds. And to me, that's where this comes really dangerous, is people that are really good at their emotional intelligence, they can cross into using this for their own self-serving goals. And that's when I'm like, okay, if they're using this now as a weapon to get what they want, that's high in manipulation. That's, to me, that screams unethical, that screams morality issues. But again, just keeping it into the emotional intelligence, this is a very strong possibility.
Okay.
So I'm going to keep going.
Okay.
Jump in whenever.
Okay.
There's a research that was conducted, and I don't have a lot of detail on this, but I do kind of want to just read this part of it because I thought it was kind of starts leaning into what we were talking about. But this research was conducted by the University of Cambridge. And what they were doing is they had a leader that was giving an inspiring speech, and they filled it with emotion. And what they found was the more emotion that they had the person giving the speech, the less likely the audience was to scrutinize the content that was in the speech. So if the person didn't have a lot of emotion, the audience was a lot more picking apart what that person was saying versus they had a leader who filled his speech full of emotion. And people really, I don't want to say their brain shut off, but the skeptic in them seemed to kind of take a back seat because they were recognizing that emotion. And there seems to be something in here. This is me reading into it a little bit, but the more emotional or the more emotions that were in the speech, the more passion there was, it lent itself to more factual or credible, and it made the speaker more believable to the audience.
That's really interesting and so true. Because how do you argue with someone's feelings, right? Like if someone's giving you an impassioned plea of this is how I feel, well, everybody has the right to feel what they want to feel. So that's an interesting take on that. I wouldn't have thought of it that way.
Or what if you are just passion? You inject passion. The way I kind of read that in emotion is, and I'm doing something really stupid and mundane, but the color red. If I'm sitting here and telling you all the reasons why the color red is the best color in the world, and I don't put a lot of passion in there, you're going to be like, okay, that's great. You're wrong, but that's your favorite color below. But what if I come at it with all this passion and I have examples and I'm really animated and I'm giving it, this really intense speech about the color red? That suddenly starts feeling more persuasive, not with my words, but because I'm trying to put myself in that space. I think a lot of people see that passion and they're like, wow, there's some truth there. It automatically authenticates the person and what they're saying to the point where now the people that are listening are like, I think he's right, because subconsciously I think we're like, wow, look at all that passion. He must be onto something. That color must be the best color ever, because look how passionate he is. He must know more that I don't know. I need to listen more intently. And then suddenly you're like, maybe he's right. Maybe the color red is the best color. Okay, I can get behind this guy. Like that's how I put it in my mind as I was kind of reading through that example.
Yeah, that's insightful and makes me reflect a lot, actually. That's really good stuff, huh?
Well, hold on, because it gets better. So it seems through the EI, so the emotional intelligence, people can fabricate. This is the other part of the conclusion of this study in Cambridge. It seems that through emotional intelligence, people can fabricate favorable impressions of themselves, expressing emotion strategically and reducing others' ability to think critically. That is what they're finding, or that is what they found through their study. So again, they can do all of these impressions. They can just fabricate. They can do all of these wonderful things because they're really high in the emotional intelligence. And it reduces the people that are listening the ability to think critically. I think that is scary as all get out.
Well, except don't you think most people do that? I guess to me, I don't walk into a room and say, hey, I'm the vice president of the United States or something. I don't lie about things. But at the same time, my goal is I want to build rapport with the room. So I'm going to present myself in the best possible way, or, be charming or whatever
Oh, be careful though, because charming is an attribute of negative. It's something to watch out for. We'll get through it later. Sorry, I cut you off. I was excited because you said the word charming. That's coming up.
Well, I'm just saying, like, charming isn't a negative attribute, and maybe it is all about motivation, but, part of being part of building cooperation and building teams and things like that is being able to have rapport with the people that you're working with. And so you know what I'm saying? Like,
I do. And I think you're stuck because there's a piece I'm holding out on you on purpose.
Oh, okay.
Because I want you to have this reaction, because I think it shows, Jamie, your inability to use this emotional intelligence that you have. You're still trying to apply it as a tool, right? Like you're still going in, you're trying to make rapport with people. You want to make sure you can be relatable. You're not trying to manipulate people. You're trying to have a great conversation. So you're using emotional intelligence still in the positive as a tool, even in that example that I'm hearing you from right now. Now, think of that, all of what we just talked about, but somebody's looking at it from, how can I get people to do what I want them to do? How can I manipulate them into doing things they normally wouldn't want to do by themselves, left unchecked?
Right.
That's what I'm talking about. And this person, they're speaking to a group and they're really good at their emotional intelligence. And so they're deciding, I'm going to use this to be able to read the crowd and start manipulating people and the crowd to have them start thinking along the lines that I'm thinking about. And two, some master manipulators are so good that they'll make it so that it's the crowds or the people idea that they're presenting to the person, when in fact, the person who's up there speaking, it's their idea. They're just making it seem like it's the audience's.
Right. Those are dangerous people.
Oh, it gets better. So I don't have all of these studies. Some of them were named or whatnot. So generally speaking, there were some other studies that linked between emotional intelligence and manipulation. And do you want to know what they found, Jamie? There's two things.
Just gonna spitball that the higher the ability to be emotionally intelligent, the more likelihood that they are a master manipulator.
Well, and that's exactly where I was at. And so I would ask you, the more you learn about emotional intelligence and the stronger you get, are you planning to start manipulating people?
Well, no. I consider them self-awareness tools, like things that I can, that teach me about myself and help me be reflective and intentional and, things like that. But I also, I'm sitting here and thinking about the word manipulate too, and that necessarily, the possibility that isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Well, I think there's ways that we manipulate people in different relationships, right? Like, I've manipulated my children.
Right. We've talked about that before.
Yeah. Just a parent-child relationship. That's normal. But imagine you manipulate your coworkers and again, for your own self-serving goals. So I think there's manipulation that if it's for the benefit of the person you're trying to manipulate, I can get behind that statement, right? Like if I'm trying to manipulate you for not to stop doing an action or to avoid a situation because ultimately it could hurt you, then I think that's justified manipulation, right? And I think that's where we're talking a lot about the parent-child relationship. What this is talking about is there is none of that relationship. It's truly you are using your emotional intelligence to manipulate a person into serving your needs or moving what you want ahead above what the other person. And you're using them as kind of like a pawn. So that's the manipulation that I'm talking about.
Right.
So I'm going to go on. So the study, there was two things that came out of it. There was a link that they discovered between emotional intelligence and manipulation. And one of the ones they found, Jamie, is that people that are lower in the big 5 trait are more likely to use emotional intelligence skills with manipulative purposes over people that are higher in the big 5 traits.
Okay, what are the big 5 traits?
So glad you asked. I'm so glad you asked.
It's like it's scripted. No, I'm just kidding.
So the big 5 traits is conscientiousness, agreeableness. Now, some of these is hard for me to pronounce. I even looked up some of them because there's a lot of words that I was like, "Ooh, okay." Neuroticism, openness to experience, and extroversion. So being an extrovert.
Okay, so people who are higher in those 5 traits are more likely to use emotional intelligence to manipulate. Is that what I heard?
No, the people that are low in those. So if you are not conscientious, if you're not agreeable, if you're not a neuroticism, openness to experience, and there's a little bit of a definition to some of these if you want to hear what some of them are, because
the only one that is kind of new to me is the neuroticism.
Yes, I think that's how you pronounce
like
it.
Neurotic,
neuroticism?
Like someone who's neurotic.
Well,
is that
it says that, but then it says calm, confident versus anxious, pessimistic. Like that's the definitions it gave.
Oh, interesting. So it's like the opposite of.
Yeah, I was like, okay. So if you are lower in these, you're going to be more likely. This is one finding. You're going to be more likely to use your artificial, your emotional intelligence for manipulative purposes.
Artificial emotional intelligence.
Exactly.
Well, and that kind of makes sense to me. That tracks. That if I'm less conscientious and, yeah, no, that makes perfect sense to me. So that tracks. That's good research because I agree with it.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding.
The other piece of it, and this is what hit me pretty hard, and I was like, no. The other thing that they said that I found in my research was that, do you know what one of the main drivers if somebody's going to do, I mean, we talked about the big 5 traits, but do you want to know what they say the main driver if someone's going to use emotional intelligence as a tool versus as a weapon?
Well, I would, my guess would be trauma.
Nope.
Really?
Nope.
IQ?
Nope.
Okay, tell me.
Empathy.
What?
They're finding people with higher levels of empathy will not use their emotional intelligence manipulatively. So if you're high on empathy, you're less likely to use your emotional intelligence or the ability to recognize other people's emotions as a weapon.
Okay. Well, okay. So that makes perfect sense. I was thinking the opposite. I think everything you've said, I've been thinking the opposite. Because I was thinking that, like, what would cause someone, what would be the triggers for someone to utilize these tools in a negative way? Well, trauma, high IQ, super intelligent people, that can be a thing. Okay. So people who are more empathetic are less likely to utilize these tools in a manipulative way.
Correct.
Huh.
So the higher you are on the empathy scale, which, remember from our last episode, which one of us scored the lowest on empathy? Raise your hand. That would be me. And so that's where I was like, okay, wait a minute. I am not ever going to use this as a weapon. But what I recognized, and this was what hit me in the face, and I so badly was like, no, that can't be a driver, is the fact that I think, and we'll get into it, I think there's other factors that would prevent somebody from using it as, a manipulative tool or weapon, which is happening to me. But I was like, it can't just be all hinging on if you're an empathetic person or not. And then I took a step back and I was kind of analyzing that a little bit for myself. And I'm like, you know what? If you understood how that feels or understand how people feel in that space or in that moment, you probably don't want to inflict that on somebody else. And then it took me to our conversations before this one, which was, that's probably why it's a lot easier for me to go to that space of saying, oh, I could look at all these different ways I could use this to manipulate people if I wanted to, because my empathy is lower than other people. Because really, there's differences between us. But in this conversation, really, I think the only thing that separates you from me is that you are a more empathetic person than I am. And some of these things your brain naturally doesn't even go to. Whereas mine, it highlights them for me. Like, I'm like, oh, look at all these things I could do. I could use this all over the board.
Well, I was going to say that's super interesting because even when you and I were talking about this topic as something that we would want to talk about, you went automatically to that space of, well, that's how all the big dictators did it. And, like emotional intelligence, I use that every day at work to set things up in a way that is beneficial for the company. But, you pointed out that's really interesting. That, I mean, it makes perfect sense. It's not like a big mic drop or something, but.
Well, it was for me because I was like, okay, maybe this is because my empathy muscle is not as strong as others.
It's building.
But I would never would have went directly to the fact that says, oh, because I don't register as high enough in the empathy, my brain is just naturally wired to be like, wow, look at all these things that you could use to manipulate other people. And then it makes me think, like, I'm walking a fine line here because I don't want to be like, oh, I'm better than you, Jamie. But at the same time, it's like, my brain naturally goes there, but I'm not going to execute on that, right? Like, I can see those tools and those opportunities that you can do. I think easier than you. I think if you stopped and thought about it, you would get there too. It's not like I think you have this mental block that you wouldn't be able to see the manipulation. but my brain goes there so much faster and so much easier. And it's like, but I could see that as a prevention, right? Like when I start seeing these signs now, I should be able to recognize that a little bit faster than somebody who's not. And if the difference is empathy, does that also extend into you probably, and this is a question, would you probably give people more benefit of the doubt than I would because you're more empathetic to them than I am?
I was just going to say that. It's interesting because if I think about several conversations and situations that you and I have been in, if you and I approach the same scenario, you're going to, if I had to tell someone the difference between you and I in approaching a specific scenario, I would say Malin's going to come in skeptical and I'm going to come in open, right? Like, and not like, not shut down and open, but you're going to be looking at it from a prove it standpoint. And I'm going to be looking at it from a, let me understand this standpoint, right? Like, I feel like that's probably one of the key markers of difference between you and I. And I don't know that I would have related that back to empathy until that is interesting that might be a piece of that and how we approach things differently because of our development of our empathy muscles. I don't even know how to
I would have challenged that all day long. Like if this was the first time, like if I was sitting here listening to you bring this kind of research, I would be challenging you up one side and down the other, because my natural reaction to that statement is it has to be more than that. It cannot be empathy, or how strong you are in empathy cannot be a driver in all of these different conversations that we've had. And all of these different, even the ability to see and use emotional intelligence in ways that could be considered a manipulative approach or used as a weapon, to hinge all of that on how strong you are as, in the empathy world. I would have challenged you all day long. I would have been like, there's no way, Jamie, there has to be more to it. It cannot be just all based off of that. Which made me think, but I'm going to take a breath because I want to see if you have anything else to add, because I do have a couple ideas. This was not part of the research. These are just my thoughts after kind of stewing on the whole people with low empathy are more likely to use emotional intelligence as a weapon than people that have higher empathy. I have a couple takeaways that I want to touch on. No,
I think that's fantastic research. And now I want to read the research. So if you want to send those to me, that'd be great. Because I want to read.
So there's two things, and I kind of set them separate, but I maybe we'll talk about them separate, but I'm going to introduce them together. Okay. So as I was reflecting, and I'm thinking, okay, it has to be more than just empathy, because I don't use emotional intelligence. I mean, in situations that we've already talked about for work, and I have to get people to see it differently, that is a form of manipulation, but it's not meant to hurt anybody. It's not meant to, take anything from them or set myself up apart from them. It's meant for them to maybe see a different path or something else that we need to be focusing on, big picture, right? But there's two things that in my mind keeps me from using this to manipulate other people. And those two things are my morals and my ethics. Mm-hmm. So I know right now we're talking empathy, and again, that might be a driver, but I also think for someone like me, well, my morals and ethics are going to prevent me from trying to manipulate people into doing what I want them to do, just because I see the opportunity a little bit clearer than some people, and maybe I can pull on some of their heartstrings, and kind of feed into those emotions and get them to do things they normally wouldn't want to do, except now I'm fiddling with their emotions and their thoughts. But it takes me back to those two things. So what do you think, Jamie? So again, let's put empathy to the side. We both kind of agree, wow, empathy plays a role. That how much or how little is debatable, but we both agree it does play a role. But what do you think about people's morals and ethics? How do you think that plays into using this type of emotional intelligence as a weapon?
Well, it almost makes me wonder if some of our development of our morals and ethics comes from our development of empathy. You know what I mean? Like,
you can go ahead.
Well, I mean, if I think about empathy is about being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. It's about perspective taking. It's about understanding, like looking through a different lens, or even just like at the very basic, just understanding that my experience of this event is not the entire enchilada, right? Like that there is more to the experience than the thing that I have experienced. And when you start doing that, it helps take your focus off of your own experience. It helps take your focus and move the focus away from your own nose and out farther to include other people and to think about how other people might feel and react. And to me, that is, well, and maybe it's just because that's part of my moral and ethical base, is that I don't want to harm other people. Like, I don't want to cause that kind of harm. So maybe I'm relating those two things because that is a big piece of my moral and ethic fiber, is to be empathetic and to show care and concern for people wherever they are. And so maybe I'm relating them because that's part of my morals and ethics.
Well, and I think in that space, you and I both have similar morals and ethics, right? Like when we're talking about using emotional intelligence to manipulate people, I think you and I probably are on the same side of the camp, right? And this is what led me to say yes, empathy is a driver, but it cannot be the only driver, because I think you and I do the same outcome, and your empathy is way more stronger than mine. And yet we both look at emotional intelligence the same way. So that's what made me think, well, our morals and ethics, well, what's driving those for some people? Because I think if I had no problem manipulating people to get my way, and some people honestly don't, recognize that as being bad. I don't know about you, but I've met a couple people in my life that they're like, hey, if people are going to be gullible enough, I might as well take advantage. Taking advantage of people, don't be someone who just fell off the turnip trunk, right? Learn from your mistakes. Like I've met people that are like, it's not my fault they're gullible. Well, no, but it's your fault that you're using that as an opportunity to further your own,
right,
goals and initiatives. So that's where I was like, okay, other than empathy, there has to be something. And that's the only two that I could land on, is my morals and my ethics. It's very similar to what you said, are going to prevent me from using this as a weapon versus a tool. Mm-hmm. And another thing, and this is really, we're talking the dark side here. If I didn't work anymore on strengthening my empathy, wouldn't it be a lot easier for me to, and I think this is part of it that started making sense to me as I'm doing some reflection. If I stopped growing my empathy muscle, suddenly it becomes a lot easier for me to manipulate other people because I have less emotional ties to people because I don't have that empathy. So it kind of self-feeds itself, right? So and that's where I'm stuck. I'm rambling, but that's where I'm stuck. Like, empathy has to be there. It has to be a part of it. But even if I reduced my empathy and I still have the same morals and the same ethics, I still won't act on it. So I'm just rambling and be done. But that's where I'm stuck. Like, to me, all of this research, all it's ever talked about was empathy as the main driver. But I would say there's probably 3 pieces here that fit into it. And I don't know if you see a 4th or not. But to me, it would be a person's empathy, morals, and ethics. Those 3 combined would drive a person to say, if they are, in my opinion, would drive somebody to say, should I or could I use this emotional intelligence as a weapon versus a tool? That's been my conclusion on that piece.
I think the other piece, the 4th thing that might play into that too, is values. And I do think values and ethics are 2 different things. So, one of the values that I have in my family and my house was honesty. That was a big value. So it's something that I trained my children about. It's something that, we really value highly in my home. Yeah, I just keep going back to that empathy thing. And it almost makes me wonder, Malin, do you have more empathy than you think you do? If that's, if you don't want to harm another person by manipulating them through your emotional intelligence, maybe you have more empathy.
Yeah, except it's more of it's right versus wrong, not how they feel, that I focus on. To be completely transparent,
Oh.
I would say, and this is, again, probably a symptom of my empathy not being as strong as yours or other people. What stops me isn't, oh, I wonder how that would make the other person feel. No, it's more of a, that's not right. Like, I have the ability to do that, but I shouldn't because that's not right. So that's what's stopping me. Very seldom do I stop myself and say, well, how will this make the other person feel? I very rarely do that, which I think is a byproduct of what we've talked about before. So that's not my first go-to.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's interesting because, yeah, I can see that. I can see you, because you do draw some very, very hard lines about right and wrong and moral and just and things like that. And I think that's part of your integrity is how you will draw that line and stick to it.
Well, and there's the fifth driver, integrity. When you just said that, that's another thing, people's integrity.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I do think that, I mean, you will, okay, this might sound really negative and that's not where I'm coming from at all, but you will do that because you will not do the wrong thing. And I will not do that because to me, the wrong thing is to hurt another person or because it might it might harm them. You know what I'm saying? And that's an interesting difference, but it's interesting that we also get to the same place. We get to the same place, even though, like, for instance, I think I don't know if our morals and ethics are a ton different. I think they come from different places. You know what I mean? Like, your morals and ethics come very, very much from, and values and probably integrity comes from your faith. And that's not a driver for me. But we do come to the same space with similar morals and values.
Well, yeah. And this isn't the intention of the podcast, so I'm going to move on. But I think if we wanted to dissect that a little bit further, I think there's a reason, or at least I have a reason, I think, why, even though you're not directly tying it to faith and maybe I am, our outcomes are similar, is because we all have that imprint on us on what's morally right or wrong. But we don't have to get into it within this podcast. But
yeah, no, I agree with that. I think you and I would just differ on where we think that comes from. Yeah.
Okay, so we only have about 10 minutes left or so. And so all of this kind of boiled up. I don't know where you're at, but all of this boiled up for me is like, okay, fine. Well, now I want to know when I'm being manipulated, right? Like, how many times, and I think we've even touched on this before. I'm sure I made this statement. I'm sure I've been manipulated in times when I didn't even know I was being manipulated. And that drove me nuts. I'm like, no, you can't manipulate me. I don't want to be manipulated.
So you want to know when you're being manipulated. And here I am thinking, oh God, have I ever used these tools to manipulate?
Yeah, no, I know I haven't used the tools to manipulate. I want to know, could I have been manipulated? So the last part of the research, and I'm going to read this to you because it was part of a study, and this comes from the Bradbury and Greaves study of 2009. And there's a little excerpt from it, and it says, people with manipulative tendencies might initially appear friendly and charismatic, while their primary intent is to use social interactions for their own personal gain, disguising them as benefits to others. Let that sink in for a second.
I'm trying to think if I know anybody. Like that.
And so that was kind of a good little introductory, because I was reading that and I was like, well, that's like the cornerstone of manipulation, right? And that kind of touches on what I was saying earlier about if you can do it in such a way, a master manipulator will make it seem like it's your idea, right? Something that you would never do in a million years. If they're manipulating you well enough, suddenly it's not the other person's idea, it's your idea. And so they don't have to convince you to go along with it because you're the one driving it. And they're like, oh, wow, that's a good idea. Yeah, we should do that. And the whole time they're like, yeah, that's what I wanted. So thanks.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, I wonder sometimes what the consciousness of those people who do that regularly is. You know what I mean? If they even realize that they're doing it.
I don't think you can accidentally manipulate people like this, though, right? Like, I don't think you can just accidentally get people to do what you want them to do.
Well, not as in like, no, because you're working for a specific outcome. Like, I mean, that is the nature of being manipulative in a self-serving way, is that you're working for a specific outcome. So no, in that way, they're conscious of that. But what I wonder is if they're conscious of exactly how maniacal it really is. You know what I mean? To like charm and disarm.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
I want to get through these, and I don't want to have to read them word for word. So I'm going to try to summarize them. But there's a couple things here that these are signs, typical signs that you can look for to see if somebody is, if they're displaying those kind of behaviors, they're manipulating you, or they have that manipulative quality. Okay. So, inconsistent behavior. So if their actions are not aligning to what they made you believe initially about them, that's a good sign that that is a manipulative person. So inconsistent behavior. Charisma.
Okay.
That is also a sign. So they can easily influence people's ideas or change their minds. They call it the awestruck effect. Right. So if people are there and they're very charismatic, suddenly you're so impressed by them that you're not thinking about anything because you're just overly impressed. It becomes that emotional trigger then because they're using their charisma. They leverage feelings of guilt.
Really?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
It says emotional manipulators know other people's weak spots and use their insecurities to elicit feelings of guilt to more easily manipulate them.
Wow. I see now I'm feeling a little more self-protective because I do feel like I've seen, you know what I mean? Like I can look back. I'm not talking about anybody currently in my life.
Give names, Jamie. Give names.
Listening. No, but literally I can go look back in situations and even someone, someone that you and I mutually have experienced some of these things that I've seen over and over again. You know what I mean? Because some of these, and I don't know. I'm not a diagnoser. I am not a psychologist, but this sounds like narcissistic people. You know what I mean? Like narcissism is.
You're stealing my thunder because when I get done with this, the last thing I want to leave you on is what's called as the dark triad. So we'll get to that as the last piece. Okay. So we'll hurry through. So this next one, we have the leveraging feelings of guilt. The next one is one that I've done, but not in a manipulative way. So this one kind of took me a step back. They share too much too soon. So do you know anybody that has shared too much too soon with you?
I have shared too much too soon.
I have too. I'm guilty.
I mean, yeah.
It says, and I'm just going to read part of this because I thought it's so suiting to how I think, but it says, to make us feel part of the inner circle, they will share many details about themselves or information that will make them appear sensitive and friendly. Now, the people that are manipulating are using it to make them appear that. I would say I have tried to get people to come into that inner circle with me sooner than I probably should have by trying to share too much, to overly invite you into my life, but not to manipulate you. But people that are using this as a manipulation tool, they do that as an appearance of trying to be friendly. Hey, you know me now. Like I'm letting you into I'm right. Confiding in you. I'm trusting you. Welcome to the inner circle.
Right.
This one also is they rely on, now I am horrible at pronouncing this, reciprocity.
Yes.
They might initially attempt to flatter us or do small favors, expecting us to do bigger ones in return.
Mm-hmm. Scratch my back. I'll scratch yours a little.
Exactly.
Yeah. Huh.
So, and then those are kind of the signs. And then they give you some emotional warning signs. I'm not going to read any of these, but if you're in a relationship with someone and you're still not quite sure, if the other person makes you feel on a regular basis, doubt, fear, anger, hopelessness, those types of feelings, that's a pretty good sign that they're probably in a relationship with someone who's trying to manipulate you. Again, I'm not a psychologist. I have no counseling background. This is just the research that I kind of pulled together around the dark side of emotional intelligence, which I thought was really fascinating. So,
okay. You totally piqued my interest, and I'm not going to lie. I was like, okay, go fast through that stuff because I want to hear about this, the triad.
The dark triad. So,
yes. Tell me
part
about
of, and again, I think this could be an episode of itself. So I'm only going to touch on it. And when I say touch on it, like I'm pretty much just going to announce what it is and kind of what makes up the triad. And then we're probably going to have to end it. So if everyone that's listening, if you want to hear more about this, let us know. We can do another episode, dive a little deeper. But
and we might just because we want to.
I mean, this is really good. So the dark triad, and this is what makes up. I don't want to have to read this, but it's such a good one. So I'm just gonna read this. This is the definition or the explanation for the dark triad. So again, there's further research that investigated the relationship between emotional intelligence and dark triad personality traits, which includes, I'm going to butcher this to no end. I'm going to do the ones I know: narcissism, psychopathy, this is so bad. Machiavellianism. Have you ever heard that word before?
Machiavelli, like well,
Machiavellianism.
Yeah, Machiavellianism. Like Machiavellian.
Way to go. I had no idea what that word is at all.
Okay,
I was
I'm
like,
not gonna
what?
lie. One of my favorite shows, it's like a reality show, and they just used that word like 15 times in one episode because the guy was talking about this woman as if she was Machiavellian.
Well, do you want to describe what that is? Do you have any insight?
It's manipulative. It's very like presenting one way and working to do the opposite of what you're presenting. So yeah.
Exactly. So these three characteristics make up the dark triad. And that's really at the heart of when you think of the dark side of emotional intelligence, this triad, these three pieces, the narcissism, the psychopathy, and the Machiavellianism.
I said it.
Machiavellianism. I'm learning. Those are the three personality traits that really come together. And there's a lot of problems with each one of these. I actually, again, I'm not someone who can diagnose somebody, but I believe there is a relationship in my current life that touches narcissism very heavily. Maybe we can talk about that in a future episode, but really dark stuff here. Like these are people that are sometimes, I would say self-delusion. Sometimes they even try to deceive themselves on what they're doing because they have to believe the lie that they're making around themselves. This dark triad is all about that. Like it's just swims in it.
That's what I was talking about. It's like there are certain, and I'm not going to go into like naming any of them, but there are certain like personality disorders where, a person can go through their life and not even know they have the personality disorder. That's part of like, that you don't understand that that's what's happening, because the awareness of that is what would grow you through that. You know what I mean? Like those are some of those skills that you would need in order to understand how to work on it. So there are things that there's some deep psychological things that happen when you aren't aware that you're sick, when you're not aware that your thinking is not right. And I think it's easy to, it's easy to make those huge. And don't get me wrong, I think that people that are struggling with these things can do really bad things. Okay, I'm not excusing that. But I think what is really, I think it's important to remember that, part of our own growth process comes from recognizing those flaws in thinking and then making those shifts and shifting to a better space. You know what I mean? So I do notice in TikTok land, and I don't know, pretty much everywhere else in social media, there's lots of things going on around, well, my narcissist did this and my narcissist did that. I think it's important to understand that that's not necessarily, that's not the end of it. Like that there can be more to the story than that. You know what I mean?
Well, yes. And again, like I said, this dark triad thing, we could do episode after episode, I think, on it. So maybe we will. Maybe we'll pull back the covers on some of these experiences that we've had in our own life. Maybe we'll find somebody that can come on and talk to us. But that's all the research that I have on the dark side of emotional intelligence. I thought it was quite fascinating, and it went pretty deep, pretty quick, and kind of spiders out into these disorders, these mental disorders that you're not naming, but we're all kind of recognizing in some aspect, which I thought was really fascinating, because I don't think I would have naturally drawn a parallel to using emotional intelligence as a weapon to having one of these mental issues. So it was good stuff.
What's your takeaway today?
My takeaway from all of this was empathy plays a stronger role than I even thought it did. I know we've joked the previous episode and this episode even a little bit, but I'm still amazed on how important strengthening that empathy muscle really is. And it goes deeper than just the whole, for me, it goes deeper than just making sure I feel what other people feel. Cause to me, that's awkward. I'm not going to lie. I don't know if I'll ever get comfortable in that space of it. But I think what it is to recognize why the importance to at least try to see the other person's side, which is what this whole, the backbone of this episode or this podcast is for, is really learning these different perspectives and talking through our differences and seeing the world through all these different lenses is wonderful. I think for me, I have to understand that I may not be as empathetic as other people, but I shouldn't water down the importance of having empathy in my life. No matter how that looks for me, it's still important. And understanding how that impacts all of these different facets is really interesting. So my takeaway is empathy is a lot more important than I was probably giving it credit, even though it probably will never look the way that, for me, it won't ever look the same way as it does for you. And I think that's fine, but I have to give it more importance going forward. How about you? Yeah. What did you get away from all this?
I think it's interesting to me to look at this through a bit of a microscope and think about like all of those times I am so conscious about not being manipulative. You know what I mean? I do feel like I have that ability. If I wanted to, I could present myself however I need to present myself in order to get whatever achieved goal I would want. But I'm super conscious of that and careful not to do that. And so it's interesting, I think, drawing the conclusion back to empathy. That is kind of interesting. I don't know. It makes sense, but I don't know that I've ever drawn that line directly. You know what I mean? But I do tend to give people the benefit of the doubt and not assume malintent. And it kind of makes me think maybe I should be a little more scrutinizing than I am. But part of, I don't know. I also feel like that's one of my values is to not approach a situation negatively. So it's giving me something to chew on for sure, to think about like, do I need to look at that a different way? Do I need to adjust a little bit? Because I don't like to be looked at as a fool either. So I'm like, you know what I'm saying? So
I have a bridge later I want to sell you, but keep going.
But anyway, so yeah, that's kind of my takeaway today. So thanks for doing the research, my friend. I'm glad you got something out of it. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah. And I was thinking for sure when we got to that part about empathy, you'd be like, slam dunk. Yeah, that's right. That's why it's so important. And I wanted to argue so badly. But the longer I chewed on this, the more I'm like, man, it has a big case. And the best that I could come up with is it might be a driver, but it cannot be the only driver. I think it has to be there in a mixed amongst all the other ones that we talked about. So it was good stuff. I was really excited when I started getting my hands dirty and kind of following down this rabbit hole, all the different things that it touched, and it made sense. And I learned a few things too. But I'm not going to lie, it still looks very easy to use as a weapon against people to manipulate them if you ever wanted to. The stronger you get with emotional intelligence, the more you're like, dance, puppet, dance, I guess. So, there's that.
Well, let's be thankful for the empathy you do have so that that's not where you go, my friend. So,
and my morals and ethics, and yes, integrity, all those wonderful things.
Yes, for sure. But no, thank you for doing the research. Thank you all for listening and joining us today on Roundtable Mindset. We appreciate you, and hope you come back again next time for another exciting episode, because they're all exciting now.
I don't know. Yep, they sure are.
Have a great week, friends.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye. This podcast was recorded and edited by Jamie and Malin. Music by Famous Cats. If you have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please email us at roundtablemindset@gmail.com. Text or call us at 402-819-8999 or join the conversation on Facebook at Roundtable Mindset Podcast.
And never miss a new episode by making sure you like, subscribe, and share wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for being our guest today. See you next time at the Roundtable. And remember, your opinions and perspectives matter and are appreciated, but might not always be shared by others, and that's okay.